You're joining the Imperfectly Happy Homeschooler. Each week, your host, Tiffany Davis, brings her sincerity, humor, and nearly 2 decades of homeschooling experience to encourage and inform you, no matter where you are on your homeschooling journey. Now let's join the show.
Welcome to the Imperfectly Happy Homeschooler. This is your host, Tiffany Davis, returning after a lovely 2-week hiatus over the holidays. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday season. I'm excited to welcome my first guest of 2014, Laura Grace Weldon. She's a veteran homeschooling mom of 4 kids, and she lives with her family on a small farm in Ohio where they raise bees, chickens, cows, and the occasional ruckus. She is also the author of Free Range Learning, How Homeschooling Changes Everything. Welcome to the show, Laura. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm glad to be here.
You know, I was really excited when I got a hold of your book because it's not the average homeschooling how-to book. It really touches on some things that I don't think we see enough in the homeschooling community. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what free-range learning is?
Well, I want to first make it clear that it's not a judgment of the unique way that we all approach education, and it's absolutely not a separate method of education. It's very basically an acknowledgement that we are all born free-range learners, that we are motivated to explore and challenge ourselves and have fun and make mistakes, and that's a natural way we build competence. So in the book, it's divided pretty evenly in 2 parts, and the first part really explains in detail how we are all free-range learners and how we can best support that. And the second half is a handbook with lots of open-ended ideas for ways to learn in hands-on, direct sort of ways. And it's got advice from homeschooling families around the world. I think about 110 of them.
Well, and I love that it is not saying this is the only way to homeschool. Here's the 1, 2, 3 approach to how everyone's going to learn perfectly. And I think that is what makes it stand out from some of the other things that I've read over the 17 years that I've been homeschooling, that it usually is, this is the best way. No, this is the best way. And I love that your approach is, no, the best way is how your child learns. And I think that's, and we don't see that enough, and that excitement in learning. But tell me, free-range learning, is it unschooling?
Well, it's unschooling if that's the way you make it. I've noticed that we've been homeschooling a very long time too, and I've noticed the kinds of things I pull in and the kids pull in change over time, and we've gotten a great deal more relaxed. I don't think we would qualify as unschoolers under any strict interpretation of that, but I've certainly toned down the heavy influence of the school mindset that I started with.
That is the same thing that I can say, that every year I think I get a little less concerned about checking off lists and more about the excitement of learning. I think for my 4 kids, from starting in the beginning, I always talk about trying to recreate that school setting. And I think as you get more into this learning environment, the difference between home and school, your focus can change quite a bit. And if someone can get a hold of your book early on, I wish that I had. I think they can get a vision for what their homeschooling can be early instead of trying to sit down and recreate a schoolroom. So tell me, where would you recommend, obviously with your book, but that homeschoolers put their focus as they're getting into this journey?
That is hard because every year there are more and more materials out there that people are trying to sell you, and there are more and more very kind of narrow approaches that people advocate. And it's interesting because homeschooling is so beautifully able to accommodate exactly what your family needs, what your kids are interested in, and what the community offers. And so I guess I've got 3 suggestions, and they're all very frugal kinds of suggestions. I would first say to expand your knowledge networks. And by that I mean the world for your kids and your family isn't just homeschoolers, although that's wonderful too. But when you have people of all ages and interests, you've got friends and family and neighbors, and you get support and enrichment in ways you can't expect. And you find all sorts of skills and experience in those people around you. And when you ask them to share something of what they know or to spend a little time with your kids or your homeschool group, it's actually a way of honoring them because people want to share what they know. So that would be one. And two, I would say look for ways that your kids can participate meaningfully in home and in your organizations you belong to and your neighborhood, and they'll find ways, and you will help them find ways to build character and a sense of purpose and find some real meaning in things that look to us like work but aren't to kids. And the third, as I would say, really pay attention to your intuition, because you as the parent love your child and you absolutely want the best for them. And so it will eventually help you trust that, your kids are learning in the way that's best for them, but you're also finding joy when you pay attention to your intuition. That was a long answer.
No, that's a perfect answer. That's a great answer. It is exciting because what if we did start that way and we didn't start by looking at which workbooks are the right level? Mm-hmm. Which brings me to my question. What do you think about levels as far as, do you think it's a good idea to say, yes, my child's in kindergarten, or yes, my child's in second grade? I know my youngest, half the time she gets asked that question, she has no idea how to respond to that. So what do you think about that, by putting a label on a certain grade as they go?
I think we can get hung up on if something is a label or not. And we have to acknowledge we live in a culture where, a friendly person at the library or the store or the park would say, what grade are you in, sweetie? And if your kids have an answer, that they can say, I'm in third grade, but I'm homeschooling, that makes them feel like they're part of the community. But in our own lives with our kids, it doesn't matter, because we know how unevenly kids learn, and they may be fantastic at math and hands-on projects and struggle in reading for a while. And it's okay. They don't have to be at a certain grade level. We can watch them surge ahead in some stuff, and the other stuff gets pulled along with it.
It's so true. It's so true, because we do want them to be members of the community and to be respectful to the people that are talking to them each day. Mm-hmm. So do you think that we can continue free-range learning all the way through high school?
I actually think that high school, the teen years in general, are some of the very most exciting and best times to homeschool. And when they're younger, there seems to be a lot of pressure to make sure that they know how to add and subtract and read and that kind of stuff. When they hit those teen years, and so for some kids even the tween years, they are so able to take all of the things that they already know and are passionate about and to go forth and really run with that kind of stuff. And there are so many avenues for teenagers to explore that we don't have to have as much pressure, because in school, the way that a first grader learns is exactly the same way that they expect a 12th grader to learn. So that 12th grader isn't being given a whole bunch of self-initiative and the kinds of things that help them become full adults. But when you homeschool, you can empower them to do those kinds of things.
That's so true. And I think we do get a lot more freedom that we don't realize, and I think we get intimidated by the idea of high school and that we're somehow going to hinder them from getting into college, which I have not really seen in my years. Have you seen that at all?
Well, I've spent a lot of time with homeschooling groups, and of course when we started, I paid a lot of attention to what those older teens were doing, because I was pretty much terrified. I was just experimenting on my kids, and I was so thrilled and honored to see the way that kids went on their own paths and succeeded. And as the years have gone by, colleges are much more eager to accept homeschoolers, and my youngest is now in college, and they've gone from, of course, I would lie awake at nights worrying about various things, but they have gone from never having taken a test other than a driver's test to doing extraordinarily well in college. And the other families I know, their kids, of course, don't always choose college. They choose all sorts of approaches to career success, and they're all doing so well in so many diverse ways that it's just, I encourage anybody with new young homeschooling kids to pay a lot of attention to homeschooling teens and young adults and see how they're doing.
And that's why it's so important to get involved in the homeschooling communities in our areas and connect with other homeschoolers. I know that I personally learned so much from the veterans when I was starting out, and when I started out, there was hardly any homeschoolers. You just didn't find them. Nowadays, it's much easier to get into a group, and with the Internet helping us to connect with others, it's a very important part of our experience.
Sometimes it's, I belonged to too many groups for too long, and there were so many fun things to do all the time, so many field trips, and that weren't there when we started either, and classes, and just, we had to learn to say, no, we're staying home. It's so funny how the word homeschooling implies you're home, but boy, you are often not.
And isn't that true? I said for homeschoolers, we sure aren't home very often. I have said it over the years so many times I can't even count it. Real quickly before we take a break, back to that idea of grades, not so much grade level, but actually keeping grades and keeping records. Do you find that free-range learning lends itself to easily keep records, especially for states that have more stringent laws?
In our state, we do have to keep records, and I will admit that I use that as a motivator sometimes, like, boy, we have got to get something, we've got to get more. And in part, I learned to pay careful attention to what they were learning, even when it didn't look entirely traditional, and that helped to bulk things up. But I definitely have had to keep records.
Okay, great. Well, that helps a lot, because I think that's some of the fear in stepping away from a traditional textbook workbook curriculum, which nothing is necessarily wrong with that, but there is the fear in stepping away from that you won't have a consistent way to keep records. So
and people can certainly use...
Oh,
okay. People can certainly.
I want to hear your answer.
Okay, people can certainly use, the workbooks and the curricula that they want to, as long as they're understanding that there's so much more. And as you know, you can homeschool all the academic stuff in a very short time in the day and still be open to everything else.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to pause for just one moment while we hear from our sponsors, and we're going to be right back.
Preparing for a disaster doesn't always mean planning for a hurricane or a power outage. It's also important to defend your family against financial challenges, because emergency preparedness means you've considered every possibility. Protect your family with an investment in gold, silver, and copper from ProvidentMetals.com. Even in times of trouble, investments from ProvidentMetals.com retain their value. Building up your finances today with precious metals will offer your family a defense against economic unrest. And in certain emergencies, you may need small, easily recognizable money for barter. That's why ProvidentMetals.com offers an array of junk silver and fractional gold. Visit our website at ProvidentMetals.com or speak to our trading desk at 877-429-8790 to set up your family on a path to a safer future.
Old Dr. Bones here, and I want to know that you're prepared to deal with injuries and illness in any disaster scenario. What would you do if modern medicine was no longer available? The second edition of the Survival Medicine Handbook is over 550 pages of how-to advice for the non-medical professional. Our book will give you a head start on any calamity. And best of all, it's written in plain old English. The second edition includes many more topics and goes into more detail than our first book. You'll learn to handle all the likely medical issues you'll encounter in times of trouble, even mass casualty events. And it's not just a conventional medical wisdom. We talk about alternatives like essential oils, medicinal herbs, and other home remedies. We help you learn how to use all the tools in the medical woodshed. And don't forget, Nurse Amy and I have a whole line of medical kits, suture stapling materials, instructional DVDs, and other items that'll help you keep it together even if things fall apart. Check us out at doomandbloom.net.
You're listening to the Survival Mom Radio Network. You'll learn something new every hour from our team of all-women hosts. Visit our website at www.thesurvivalmom.com. Aren't you glad you listened? Now, back to the show.
Okay, we're back. Today my guest is author and homeschooling mom, Laura Grace Weldon, and we're talking about free-range learning. And this is really something exciting, and I encourage you to read the book because we're not going to have enough time to go into all the exciting things that Laura has in her book. And I think whether you're a new homeschooler or a veteran homeschooler, there is something to be gained from reading her book. I have it on my Kindle. I'm really enjoying it. I'm reading it for the third time. So, Laura, you spend a lot of time talking about the importance of interest of the children that we are homeschooling, our children. So can you share a little bit about why that's so important? How has that affected your homeschooling experience personally?
Well, it's something that we often overlook in the school mindset. But the big thinkers in education talk about individualized or customized learning as the wave of the future, but we're doing it every day as homeschoolers. And sometimes it's in little ways of making information relevant. If your child will learn about ratios when they're talking about their interests, baseball statistics, or how to cut a pizza, that's a tiny example. But a bigger example, one that I probably give too often, is one of my sons, I think this the year before he was in officially third grade, we were at a picnic with a whole bunch of people, and an older gentleman brought a bunch of those really cheap little balsa plane kits for the kids, and they put them together, all these kids, and they threw them, and they broke very quickly. And my son gathered up these pieces and kept trying to make, fashion different designs that would fly. And so the guy who'd brought them, who happened to be a pilot, sat down with him and showed him a few things, and they ended up making all sorts of flyable stuff. Just over that summer, my son kept getting books from the library on the history of planes and planes in warfare and plane designs and experimental stuff. He would tell me about Bernoulli's principle, and he would beg for like basswood and balsa and, sharp implements, and he would cut his own designs and make increasingly complex planes. He ended up doing that as a 4-H project that year, and he went to state award he was the only child in that whole 4-H project in the state who had made his own design. Everybody else bought a kit. And his fascination with planes didn't stick necessarily, but he had during that time taught himself history and science, and he perhaps much more importantly taught himself how he can learn. And so he carried that with him, and he would have other interests, and he would get this momentum, and he would investigate it and do all the sorts of projects pretty much on his own. I learned to step back and just facilitate. I was certainly the one carrying those library books home or taking them to an exhibit, but he was the one really doing the work of that. And that's just one of many examples in my family how interests propel kids forward.
And then they think that learning is fun, and it's not the I hate school mentality. Mm-hmm. They're learning all the things that they need to learn, how to study, how to research. They're getting history, they're getting science, but they're not stuck in this idea that learning isn't fun or that school isn't fun. Which brings me to my next question. Do you have any recommendations for a parent that's dealing with a difficult student, someone that does say I hate school, or one that's maybe struggling with a particular subject like reading?
Well, I certainly wouldn't have listened to myself when I started homeschooling, but I can say from this perspective now that the kinds of stuff we push so intently are often ways that we're pushing a child away from that subject. And it's exactly the opposite of what we want to do. We don't want our kids to hate reading or math or any of that sort of thing. So to back off, and there's an intuition one, to back off and to just kind of pay attention to where the joy in that can be. And reading, for example, if your child is getting all the great concepts of books without reading them by listening to books on tape and listening to you read aloud and participating in all kinds of enriching things around the written word, the studies show very convincingly that children may not be ready to read in terms of brain maturation much later than we expect. And it's terrifying with a 9 or 10-year-old who's still not reading. But we find that when kids, one of the examples in my book was a woman who talked about her son got involved in online gaming forums and had to read all these difficult hacks for games and had to participate in this forum with complete sentences written correctly, or people paid no attention to him. And he went from being a complete non-reader to a very proficient reader, which extended across, wanting to read books and magazines and, write notes and that sort of thing. And we find that also, now that I'm on the track of reading, that we think it has a lot to do with, your focus and your attention and pay attention to words. But pre-reading has a lot to do with physical movement. So a child running and swinging and sliding and swimming, those are all these bilateral movements that help the brain mature. So sitting still in a chair and paying attention may actually be the wrong thing when kids are struggling with reading.
What a different way to look at that. And, I had early readers until I hit my youngest, and she is my I hate school kid. And she's the one who made me really loosen the reins and look at things at a completely different way, because otherwise I was going to lose her, and she would never love learning. So she's definitely my free range learner for absolutely. If I didn't do that with her, she wouldn't love it the way that she does.
It's interesting how homeschooling makes us kind of re-examine our own beliefs, but it also kind of broadens our own horizons, because the lessons that our kids are teaching us are often lessons that we need in our own lives, which is kind of a hard pill to swallow sometimes.
I could not agree more, because I tend to be a person that thinks everything needs to be in a list form that I can actually cross off. And parenting doesn't go like that. At least it hasn't for me. And certainly homeschooling, I'm less frustrated. They're less frustrated when I try not to have a list all the time. Now, I do have a teenager that prefers a list that she can mark off. She's a lot like I am. And that works for her, so we do that for her. But the 8-year-old, she has to kind of school all throughout the day, and that works for her and works for me too. So I'm glad to have the flexibility and to know that it's okay to have that. I want to jump a little bit over to something slightly different. Tell me, how does technology fit into free range learning?
Boy, that is a huge question, isn't it?
It is.
I have raised my kids when they were very small in a no TV house and worked our way into, obviously, like computers in everybody's room. But I think it's important personally, I think it's important to preserve those early years, and I'm talking, infant, as little tablet and TV and computer time as possible, because they are so sensory oriented in their learning and so relationship oriented. And as they get older, I think increasing amounts of technology are absolutely fine. My kids made fantastic connections with people around the world online in various special interest forums that were way out of my range of complete understanding, like one of my sons was involved in an audiophile forum where he was learning to modify old amplifiers to work with new equipment, and he learned huge amounts of things from these people online. He ended up making a little component for amplifiers that he started selling in his own little business when he was about 14. He also was inspired to make his own guitar, starting with raw wood from this forum of people, and he now has these friendships with people in Iceland and Germany and Australia, and they talk all the time, and they establish these friendships over an interest.
And that's where we can find the positives in technology. I think we can fear it, or we can make it too much in our lives, but it's finding the balance and finding the good things in it. So I can identify with that answer a lot.
Well, there's also
go ahead.
We can actually look at the way that technology and online sharing kind of shows us something about homeschooling, because the best technology out there is about collaboration. It's not being a consumer and just playing the game or clicking through. It's about open source sorts of things, exchanging ideas. And what's interesting is that many of us, I would say most of us, homeschool in ways that are open source and collaborative. We pull in all sorts of ideas and opinions opportunities, and we sort through those and kind of expand our own understanding and our own world. And so we are ourselves reshaping what education is like in the same way that technology is reshaping our culture.
Wow, that's actually one of the best ways I've heard homeschooling explained in quite some time. Real quickly before we wrap up today, do you think that a veteran homeschooler, someone like me that's been doing this 17 years or maybe a little less, but someone, that has experience behind them and is looking for a change, do you think that it's too late in the game for anyone to start free range style?
Well, you can free range learn with all kinds of homeschooling styles. You don't have to drop your Charlotte Mason or your Enki or whatever you're doing. You can. It just is it's a way of looking at and understanding the way our children learn, and we learn too. So I think that to welcome any kind of evolution that your homeschooling life has is just a way of saying yes to the best things, to the most exciting things, to the things that bring you joy, and that's always a good kind of yes. Laura,
that is such a fabulous way to look at. You don't have to change everything. It's about banding the love of your own interests and the ones of your children, and I can't tell you how exciting this interview has been for me. This is a great talk. I've enjoyed the book, but just hearing you speak about these things and, you answer a few questions that, when I was reading the book, popped up into my head. I think it's really exciting, and I hope that everyone will take a time to get the book and really read it, and I think they're going to be blessed by it. And it's really not that new of a concept. We do it naturally. We look up things that we're interested in, but this is a way to look at bringing this into our homeschooling. And you can find Laura's book on Amazon.com. You can also find Laura on her webpage, lauragraceweldon.com, and I'll have links for both of those in my show notes for you. You can find me at imperfectlyhappy.com and facebook.com/imperfectlyhappy, where I'm talking about homeschooling and homesteading and all the